Jennifer Campbell stared at her reflection in the bank vault's metallic surface one last time. Her usually well-kept brown hair was now deliberately disheveled, her face stripped of makeup, and her expensive clothes replaced with worn-out thrift store finds. She placed her wallet, phone, and most of her identification into the safety deposit box, keeping only the bare minimum hidden in a secret pocket. "This is it," she whispered, closing the vault door. For the next few weeks, she would become one of the city's homeless. A deep dive investigation into inequality that seemed brilliant in the newsroom, but now made her stomach churn. The evening air bit through her thin jacket as she stepped onto the street. People who normally would have smiled or nodded at her well-dressed self now averted their eyes or crossed to the other side. A businessman clutched his briefcase tighter as she passed. A woman pulled her child closer. The first drops of rain began to fall as Jennifer sought shelter under a store's marquee. Water dripped from the edge of the awning, creating a curtain that separated her from the rushing pedestrians. A shop owner emerged, his face twisted with disgust. "You can't stay here," he barked, gesturing wildly. "You'll drive away customers. Move along." "Please, it's raining. I just need dash." "I said move." He grabbed a broom, making sweeping motions as if she were dirt to be cleared away. Jennifer stumbled backward, her worn sneakers splashing in a puddle. Laughter erupted from a group of young men passing by. "Hey, baby, rough night," one called out. "I've got a warm bed if you're interested." More laughter, more jeers. Jennifer hugged herself tighter, hurrying away from their voices. The rain was falling harder now, soaking through her clothes. She made her way to the nearest subway station, seeking refuge in its fluorescent-lit warmth. "Miss, you can't loiter here." A security guard approached almost immediately. "Station closes in 20 minutes anyway." Back into the rain, back into the darkness. Jennifer wandered through alleyways, her feet already aching. Other homeless people huddled in doorways and under cardboard shelters. But they turned away when she approached. No one wanted to share their precious dry space with a newcomer. The sounds of the city grew more menacing as night deepened. Distant sirens wailed. Somewhere, glass shattered. Angry voices argued in the darkness. Jennifer found herself in a narrow alley between two buildings, relatively sheltered from the rain. As she slid down against the cold brick wall, a figure at the other end caught her attention. An older woman sat wrapped in layers of clothes, her face partly hidden by a hood. Their eyes met briefly before the woman turned away, but not before Jennifer noticed a wariness in her gaze. "This must be Heidi," she thought, remembering the descriptions from her preliminary research. "Hi," Jennifer ventured, her voice shaking more than she'd expected. "Is it okay if I stay here tonight?" No response. The woman, Heidi, shifted slightly, turning her back more definitively toward Jennifer. The message was clear. Stay if you must, but don't expect conversation. Jennifer pulled her knees to her chest, trying to conserve warmth. Her clothes were damp, and the brick wall leached away what little heat remained. Every sound made her jump. The scurrying of rats, the slamming of distant doors, the echoing footsteps that could belong to anyone or anything. The night stretched endlessly. Jennifer's teeth chattered, and her muscles ached from tensing against the cold. This was just the first night of many, she reminded herself. Just the beginning of understanding what it truly meant to be invisible, unwanted, swept aside. Beam lights suddenly illuminated the alley entrance, and authoritative voices carried through the darkness. "Police, clear the area immediately." Jennifer froze, realizing with growing panic that she was trapped in the alley with Heidi, and the only exit was now blocked by approaching officers. She could hear the heavy footsteps of the officers echoing off the alley walls, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Heidi remained motionless, but Jennifer noticed her hands tightening around her worn backpack. "This is your final warning," one officer called out. "This area is being cleared for cleaning. Anyone remaining will be removed by force." Jennifer's heart pounded against her ribs. The reality of her situation crashed over her. She wasn't really homeless, but she couldn't prove otherwise. Her documentation was locked safely away in that bank vault, and her appearance now matched exactly what these officers expected to see. Just another vagrant to be cleared away. The beam of light found her face, making her squint and turn away. In her previous life, she'd have stood up confidently, shown her press credentials, maybe even gotten a quote for a story. Now, she felt the full weight of her powerlessness, understanding for the first time what it truly meant to be at the mercy of others. Get up. The order came sharp and clear. Both of you on your feet. Now! Jennifer struggled to stand, her legs numb from sitting on the cold ground. She glanced at Heidi, who had also risen but remained pressed against the wall, her face a mask of resigned familiarity with this routine. The officers and their flashlights were closing in from both ends of the alley now, and Jennifer realized with growing panic that they were trapped in the narrow space between two buildings, with officers coming from both directions. The police flashlights cut through the darkness like searchlights, illuminating Jennifer's terrified face as she pressed herself against the brick wall. Before she could process what was happening, a rough hand grabbed her arm. It was Heidi, pulling her towards a narrow gap between the buildings. "Move!" Heidi hissed, her grip surprisingly strong for someone who looked so frail. Jennifer stumbled forward as they plunged into the darkness. The sound of police boots and commanding voices echoed behind them. Her heart pounded against her ribs as they navigated through a maze of alleyways, the stench of garbage and urine filling her nostrils. "Stop right there." A voice boomed from behind. Heidi yanked Jennifer around a corner, their feet splashing through puddles. The older woman seemed to know these back streets intimately, leading them through passages Jennifer would never have noticed. They ducked under a rusty fire escape, the metal creaking ominously above their heads. A chain-link fence appeared before them, moonlight glinting off its metal diamonds. Heidi scaled it with practiced ease, but Jennifer's movements were clumsy. As she swung her leg over the top, her oversized jacket caught on the metal. She pulled hard, hearing the fabric tear and feeling something fall from her pocket. They landed on the other side, Jennifer's ankle twisting slightly on impact. Heidi kept them moving, ducking into a covered passageway that smelled of mold and decay. Only when the police sirens faded into the distance did they slow their pace. "Under here," Heidi whispered, guiding Jennifer beneath a concrete bridge. The space was sheltered from the wind, and Jennifer could see evidence of previous occupants: a flattened cardboard box, some newspaper pages, an empty can. It was only then, as she caught her breath, that Jennifer realized what had fallen during their escape. Her hand flew to her empty pocket, and panic seized her chest. "My documents," she gasped. "They fell when we crossed the fence." Heidi's face hardened. "Can't go back now. They'll be watching." Reality crashed over Jennifer like a cold wave. Without her ID, she was truly trapped in this world she'd only meant to visit. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd planned every detail of her undercover assignment except for this. Heidi reached into her worn backpack and pulled out a plastic water bottle and half a loaf of bread that had seen better days. She tore the bread in two and offered Jennifer a piece without meeting her eyes. "Thank you," Jennifer said, both for the food and the escape. Heidi merely nodded, taking small, careful bites of her portion. They sat in uncomfortable silence, the distant city sounds creating a strange urban lullaby. Jennifer noticed how Heidi kept one hand in her coat pocket, clutching something protectively. As the older woman shifted position, a small photograph slipped out, falling onto the concrete between them. Heidi snatched it up quickly, but not before Jennifer caught a glimpse of a young girl's face, smiling at the camera. The protective way Heidi handled the photo spoke volumes. Before Jennifer could say anything, footsteps approached their hideout. Both women tensed, but it was just a pair of drunk students stumbling past, their laughter echoing under the bridge. Heidi's fingers traced the edges of the photograph, her weather-worn face softening for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, rough with emotion. I handed her over for adoption, Heidi whispered, her hands trembling as she held the yellowed photograph. The admission hung in the damp air between them. Jennifer watched as Heidi's fingers continued to trace the photograph's worn edges, her eyes distant with memory. She was 5, Heidi continued, her voice cracking. I had a good job at home. Then the company went under. I couldn't find work. The savings disappeared so fast. She tucked the photo back into her pocket with the gentle care of someone handling a precious relic. Jennifer shifted on the hard concrete, her body aching from the chase and the cold. Every instinct as a journalist urged her to ask questions, to probe deeper, but something in Heidi's demeanor made her hold back. A rat scurried past their feet, making Jennifer jump. Heidi didn't even flinch, too lost in her memories. The bridge above them rumbled with passing traffic, sending small particles of dust floating down around them. The social worker said she'd have a better life. Heidi spoke again, her words barely audible above the city noise. Said I was doing the right thing, but every night I see her face. Every single night. Jennifer's throat tightened. Her notebook was in her pocket, but reaching for it now felt like a betrayal. This wasn't just another story anymore. The weight of her missing documents seemed to press even heavier on her mind. She was now caught between two worlds, unable to retreat to her comfortable life, yet not truly belonging in Heidi's reality. The night grew colder, and Heidi pulled a threadbare blanket from her backpack, offering half to Jennifer. They huddled together for warmth, two women from different worlds united by circumstance under a bridge in a city that had forgotten them both. We should try to sleep, Heidi muttered. Can't stay in one place too long tomorrow. They'll be looking for us in this area. As Jennifer closed her eyes, the hard ground beneath her body, she realized how quickly her carefully planned investigation had spiraled out of control. Her editor's words echoed in her mind. Just 3 days on the streets. Gather what you need, then out. Now, without her ID, with only the clothes on her back and a newfound ally with a heartbreaking past, those simple instructions seemed like a lifetime ago. The distant wail of a siren made them both tense, but it faded away, leaving only the steady drip of water from the bridge above and the soft sound of Heidi's breathing as she clutched the pocket holding her daughter's photo. The cold morning air bit through Jennifer's thin jacket as she listened to Heidi's story unfold. They sat on a worn wooden bench in a small park, sharing the remnants of a coffee someone had left behind. Heidi's hands trembled slightly as she spoke, her eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the city skyline. I had everything once, Heidi said, her voice barely above a whisper. A job at the bank, a small apartment, a life. She paused, taking a shallow breath. Then came the accident. Medical bills piled up. I couldn't work, couldn't pay rent. It's amazing how quickly everything can slip through your fingers. Jennifer fought the urge to reach for her non-existent notebook, instead committing every word to memory. The guilt gnawed at her insides. Here she was, playing at being homeless while Heidi shared her real trauma. The day I gave her up, Heidi continued, her voice cracking, it was raining, just like today. She was wearing this tiny pink dress with white flowers. The social worker kept saying it was the right thing to do, that she'd have a better life. Heidi's fingers traced the edge of the photograph in her pocket, a gesture Jennifer had noticed she did frequently. They walked together to a nearby church where volunteers were handing out hot coffee and day-old pastries. Heidi showed Jennifer the unwritten rules, which volunteers were kind, which ones looked down their noses, how to time their approach to avoid conflict with other homeless people. You're new to this, Heidi observed not unkindly. Your hands are too soft, but you learn quick. The guilt intensified in Jennifer's stomach. She watched as Heidi navigated the morning ritual with practiced ease, greeting some of the regulars with quiet nods. A group of men huddled nearby, sharing stories of better days. One spoke of his time as a teacher, another of the business he'd lost. Jennifer listened, each story cutting deeper than the last. They tried the shelter that evening, but it was full. The worker at the desk barely looked at them, dismissing their presence with a wave of his hand. Nothing available. Try again tomorrow. They always say that to me, Heidi muttered as they walked away. Some faces they just don't like to see. In an alley behind a restaurant, they found relative privacy. Heidi shared more about Ravian, her daughter, how she loved strawberry ice cream, how she would sing herself to sleep, how her laugh could light up a room. Sometimes I dream about her, Heidi said, leaning against the brick wall. She's all grown up now. Maybe she's in college. Maybe she has a good job, a family of her own. Her voice trailed off. Do you think she ever thinks about me? Jennifer swallowed hard, her reporter's instincts warring with her growing emotional investment. I'm sure she does, she managed to say. As night fell, they talked about dreams. Not just sleeping dreams, but the kind they used to have for their lives. Heidi spoke of wanting to be a photographer once. I loved capturing moments, she said. Now moments just pass me by. Jennifer felt the weight of her deception growing heavier with each shared confidence. She made a silent vow to help Heidi, somehow, beyond just writing her story. Their conversation was interrupted by movement at the alley's entrance. Jennifer's heart jumped. She recognized the figure standing there, backlit by the street lamp. It was Tom from the newspaper, but in her current state unwashed, wearing ragged clothes, her hair a tangled mess. She might as well have been invisible. She raised her hand slightly, trying to catch his attention, but he simply glanced their way with the same dismissive look she'd seen hundreds of times on other faces since starting this assignment. The Tom's footsteps faded away, and with them, Jennifer's chance at reconnecting with her real life. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had become so convincing in her role that even those who knew her couldn't see past the dirt and desperation. Someone you know? Heidi asked, her keen eyes missing nothing. I thought so, Jennifer replied carefully, but I guess not. Later that night, as they huddled under a makeshift shelter of cardboard and plastic, Heidi pulled out the photograph again. In the dim light from a nearby street lamp, Jennifer could make out more details. A toddler with bright eyes and curly hair, wearing the pink dress Heidi had described earlier. You know what's funny? Heidi said, tracing the edge of the photo with her fingertip. I keep thinking I see her sometimes. In crowds, on buses. Every young woman with curly hair makes my heart stop for a second. She tucked the photo away carefully. But then I remember she wouldn't recognize me anyway. I'm just another invisible person on the street. Jennifer lay awake long after Heidi had fallen asleep, the sounds of the city a constant backdrop to her thoughts. The story she had come to write was transforming into something else entirely. This wasn't just about experiencing homelessness firsthand anymore. It was about Heidi, about Ravian, about all the broken connections that the streets had claimed. She heard footsteps approaching and instinctively tensed, but it was just another homeless man they'd met earlier, Marcus, offering them half a sandwich he'd found. The simple act of sharing what little he had struck Jennifer harder than any of the academic articles she'd read about poverty and community. The next morning, they joined the early crowd at a local soup kitchen. Jennifer watched as Heidi interacted with others, noting how she always seemed to find the newest, most vulnerable people and help them navigate the system. Even in her own desperate situation, she looked out for others. Everyone has a story, Heidi told her as they ate. Most people just don't want to hear them. Jennifer noticed a man standing near the entrance, watching them intently. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized him, another colleague from the newspaper. But like before, her current appearance made her unrecognizable. She sat there, trapped between worlds, as her coworker surveyed the room with professional detachment, likely working on his own story about the homeless crisis. Jennifer's heart raced as she spotted Mark from the newsroom across the street. He was right there, just a few yards away, checking his phone while waiting for the bus. This could be her chance to get help, to reconnect with her real life. She took a step forward, but Heidi's hand grabbed her arm. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Jennifer tried to shake off Heidi's grip. I just. I need to talk to that man. He can help us. She broke free and hurried toward Mark, her unwashed hair falling over her face, her dirty clothes hanging loosely on her frame. Mark! Mark, it's me, Jennifer. Mark looked up, startled by the disheveled woman approaching him. His eyes showed no recognition, only concern and slight fear. He took a step back. Please, I work with you at the Daily Chronicle. It's Jennifer Campbell. Lady, I don't know who you are, but stay back, Mark said, holding up his hands defensively. Other people at the bus stop began staring, some moving away. Mark, please. I can prove it. Ask me anything about the newsroom, about the Carter investigation we worked on last month. A security guard from the nearby building started walking toward them. Mark shook his head and stepped onto his arriving bus, leaving Jennifer standing there, the harsh reality of her situation hitting her like a physical blow. She returned to Heidi, who was watching with suspicious eyes. Who was that man? Nobody, Jennifer mumbled. I thought he was someone else. Later that day, Jennifer managed to slip away while Heidi was getting food from a local church's donation line. She made her way to the public library, her heart still heavy from the morning's failure. The librarian eyed her warily, but didn't stop her from using one of the public computers. Her fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard, searching through digital archives of adoption records from 15 years ago. Something about Heidi's story hadn't added up. The timing, the procedures she described, the lack of proper documentation. Come on, she whispered, scrolling through pages of data. A pattern began to emerge. Several adoptions processed through the same agency during that period had inconsistencies, missing paperwork, rushed procedures, and one name kept appearing. Richard Dawson, adoption attorney. Jennifer scribbled notes in a small notebook she'd found in a dumpster, her journalist instincts firing on all cylinders. She found an old article about complaints against Dawson's practice, though nothing had ever been proven. A retired social worker named Marion Hayes had filed one of those complaints. Jennifer managed to track down her current address through public records. It wasn't far. She found Hayes living in a small apartment complex on the east side. The elderly woman was initially reluctant to talk, but Jennifer's persistent questioning finally broke through. Those adoptions weren't right, Hayes admitted, her hands shaking as she held her teacup. The paperwork was rushed. Some birth mothers were pressured, but proving it. She shrugged helplessly. Back on the streets, Jennifer's mind raced with possibilities. She needed to make a call to her contact at the paper, but she had to be careful. Heidi was becoming increasingly suspicious of her mysterious disappearances and note-taking. She found a payphone that still worked and used her last quarter to call Tommy, her research assistant. I need you to dig into Richard Dawson's adoption cases from 2008, she whispered into the receiver. Focus on any connections to St. Mary's Home for Women. Jennifer, where are you? Everyone's worried. The line went dead. Quarter spent. When she returned to their sleeping spot under the bridge, Heidi was waiting with questions in her eyes. Jennifer felt the weight of her deception growing heavier. In her pocket, she carried the address of Ravian's current workplace, a community center just 10 blocks from where they slept every night. She watched Heidi pull out the old photograph of her daughter, stroking it with tender fingers. The guilt was becoming unbearable. A piece of paper slipped from Jennifer's pocket, a note with Ravian's current address. Heidi's eyes fixed on the fallen paper, and Jennifer's heart stopped. She reached for it, but the wind caught the sheet, pushing it just beyond her grasp. Heidi was faster, snatching it before it could blow away completely. What's this? Heidi's voice was sharp, her eyes scanning the address. You've been keeping secrets. Jennifer's mind raced for an explanation. It's an address for a shelter. I heard they might have beds available. Don't lie to me. Heidi's hands were trembling now. I know this area. This is the community center. Why do you have this address? The tension between them was palpable. Jennifer opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. How could she explain that her daughter, the one she'd been mourning for 15 years, was working just blocks away? I've watched you, Heidi continued, her voice growing harder. Writing in that notebook when you think I'm not looking. Disappearing for hours. Making secret phone calls. Who are you, really? A group of people walked past their spot under the bridge, their shadows stretching long in the setting sun. Jennifer used the momentary distraction to reach for her notebook, but Heidi was quicker again. No more lies, Heidi said, clutching both the address and the notebook. Tell me what's going on, or I'm leaving right now. Jennifer felt her carefully constructed investigation crumbling around her. She had gotten too close, let herself care too much. The story had become more than just an article. It had become about real people, real pain, real hope. The address, Jennifer started, her voice barely above a whisper. It's where your daughter works. The silence that followed was deafening. Heidi stared at the paper in her hands, all color draining from her face. The notebook fell from her grasp, paper scattering across the damp ground. How? How long have you known? Just a few days. I've been trying to find the right way to tell you. There's more, Heidi. The adoption. There were irregularities. The lawyer who handled it, Richard Dawson, he... Stop. Heidi held up her hand, her voice shaking. Just stop. All this time, you've been, what, investigating me? My life? My pain? I wanted to help, Jennifer pleaded. I needed to be sure before I told you. I needed to understand what happened. Heidi clutched a photo of Ravian to her chest, her eyes filling with tears. She's been so close. All this time, she's been right here. What's that paper? Heidi's voice was sharp, her eyes fixed on the small piece that had fallen from Jennifer's pocket. Jennifer's heart raced as she quickly snatched it from the ground, crumpling it in her palm. Just some notes about places that give out free meals. Jennifer lied, hating herself for every word. The address that could lead to Ravian burned in her hand like a hot coal. They made their way to the community center near the address Jennifer had discovered. Her stomach churned as she watched a young woman with Heidi's eyes helping elderly homeless people through the door. Ravian, she was right there, completely unaware her mother was watching from across the street. Jennifer's fingers itched for her hidden notebook, tucked away in the inner pocket of her ragged coat. She needed to document this moment, but couldn't risk Heidi seeing her write anything down. I sometimes wonder what she looks like now, Heidi said suddenly, clutching the old photograph she always carried. If she's happy, if she's safe, if she hates me for what I did. Jennifer swallowed hard. I'm sure she doesn't hate you. You did what you thought was best. Did I? Heidi's voice cracked. Every day I think about what would have happened if I just tried harder, fought more. Maybe we could have made it somehow. Their conversation was interrupted by the harsh voice of a shelter worker. You two again? We told you yesterday, no loitering around here without proper ID. Jennifer felt her chest tighten as she recognized the worker, someone she'd interviewed months ago for a different story. She turned away quickly, pulling her matted hair forward to cover her face. We're just resting, Heidi said firmly. We're not bothering anyone. The worker's eyes narrowed, studying Jennifer. Don't I know you from somewhere? No, Jennifer mumbled, keeping her head down. Never been here before. Heidi stepped between them. Leave her alone. We're going anyway. As they walked away, Jennifer could feel the worker's suspicious gaze following them. Her hands trembled as she realized how close she'd come to being exposed. Later that night, huddled in their usual spot, Jennifer listened as Heidi shared more details about Ravian's childhood, her first steps, her favorite stuffed animal, the way she used to sing herself to sleep. Each word was a dagger of guilt in Jennifer's heart. She'd discovered so much more than she'd imagined possible. Ravian wasn't just working at the community center. She dedicated her life to helping the homeless, the very people her mother had become part of. Jennifer's notebook was filling up with the story of a lifetime, but it no longer felt like just a story. These were real lives, real pain, real love. She watched Heidi sleeping fitfully beside her, the photograph clutched to her chest even in sleep. The sounds of the city at night surrounded them. Distant sirens, arguing voices, the rumble of trucks. Jennifer pulled out her notebook one more time, using the dim light from a nearby street lamp to write. A police scanner crackled to life nearby. Jennifer froze as she heard the word sweep and cleanup operation coming through the static. She looked at Heidi's sleeping form, remembering all the stories she'd heard about these operations. The violence, the lost possessions, the scattered communities. She had to protect Heidi, had to find a way to reunite her with Ravian before it was too late. But how could she do it without revealing her deception? Sirens and flashing lights suddenly filled the street as removal teams approached their location. The harsh blue and red lights painted grotesque shadows on the walls around them. Jennifer could see other homeless people already scattering, like leaves in the wind, grabbing what few possessions they could carry. "I promise I won't let anything happen to you," Jennifer whispered to Heidi, who was now stirring from her sleep, confusion clouding her face. Their eyes met in the strobing lights, and for a moment, Jennifer saw such raw trust in Heidi's gaze that it made her want to confess everything right there. The truth about who she was, about finding Ravian, about the stories she'd been writing. But before she could speak, heavy boots thundered around the corner. Jennifer's hand instinctively went to her hidden notebook. Everything she'd documented, the corruption in the adoption system, the human stories behind the statistics, the truth about Ravian, it was all there. If they were searched, if it was found, clear the area immediately. A voice boomed through a megaphone. "This is a mandatory evacuation." Heidi grabbed her few possessions with practiced speed. But her hands were shaking so badly, she dropped her precious photograph. Jennifer lunged for it, managing to snatch it just before a boot could step on it. "Please," Jennifer tried reasoning with the approaching officers. "We just need a few minutes to dash." "Now!" The order came with the threat of force behind it. Through the chaos, Jennifer caught a glimpse of the community center where Ravian worked. Just a few blocks away. So close. If she could just find a way to make it happen, mother and daughter could be reunited. But first, they had to survive this night. Sirens and flashing lights filled the street, while removal teams approached with mechanical efficiency. Jennifer watched in horror as the removal teams began methodically clearing the area, tossing people's belongings into large garbage trucks. A woman nearby wept as her cart, containing everything she owned, was seized and emptied. "This way." Heidi grabbed Jennifer's arm, pulling her toward a narrow alley. They pressed themselves against the cold brick wall as officers passed by with flashlights. Jennifer could feel Heidi's heart pounding through their pressed shoulders. "We need to split up," Heidi whispered urgently. "They're less likely to chase us if we go in different directions." "No!" Jennifer's protest came out louder than intended. She couldn't lose Heidi now, not when they were so close to finding Ravian. "We stick together." A spotlight swept the alley, forcing them deeper into the shadows. Jennifer's notebook pressed against her ribs, every page filled with the truth that could either destroy or heal their relationship. The weight of her deception had never felt heavier. "Something's not right with you," Heidi said suddenly, her voice tight with suspicion. "The way you write in that notebook when you think I'm sleeping. The way that shelter worker recognized you. Who are you, really?" Before Jennifer could respond, the beam of a flashlight caught them full in the face. "Over here," a voice shouted. Two more. They ran, past dumpsters and chain-link fences, through puddles that splashed dirty water up their legs. Jennifer's lungs burned as they zigzagged through the maze of back alleys, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter. Finally, they emerged onto a quiet street. The community center loomed ahead, dark and silent at this hour. Ravian's workplace. the place where mother and daughter unknowingly pass within feet of each other every day. I know these streets, Heidi panted. There's a safe place we can dash. A police cruiser turned the corner, its lights painting the walls around them in red and blue. They pressed themselves into a doorway, holding their breath as it passed. But the damage was done. The night's chaos had forced them into the open, vulnerable and exposed. Sirens and flashing lights filled the street, while removal teams approached with mechanical efficiency. The night erupted into chaos as police sirens wailed and flashing lights illuminated the dark streets. Jennifer's heart raced as she watched teams of social workers and police officers approaching from both ends of the alley. The urban cleanup operation they had feared was finally happening. We need to move now. Heidi grabbed Jennifer's arm, but the sudden flood of people running in panic separated them. Jennifer reached out, her fingers barely grazing Heidi's sleeve before the crowd pushed them in opposite directions. Heidi! Jennifer's voice was lost in the cacophony of shouts, sirens, and the heavy footsteps of dozens of people scattering like startled pigeons. She caught glimpses of her friend's gray coat disappearing into the darkness, but every attempt to follow was blocked by the chaos around her. For hours, Jennifer searched their usual spots: the abandoned warehouse where they sometimes found shelter, the back alley behind the Chinese restaurant that gave away leftover food, the hidden corner near the park. Each location held only empty spaces and forgotten belongings scattered by the operation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of searching, Jennifer managed to find a quiet spot to pull out the burner phone she kept hidden for emergencies. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the newspaper's number. Metro desk, Mark speaking. Mark, it's Jennifer Campbell. A long pause followed. Jenny, where the hell have you been? The editor's going crazy. Listen, I can't explain everything now, but I'm onto something big. The story's evolved beyond what we initially planned. She spoke quickly, eyes scanning the street for any sign of authorities. I need more time. Time? You've been MIA for days. We were about to file a missing person report. I know. But trust me on this. It's not just about homelessness anymore. There's a human story here that needs to be told. Jennifer's voice cracked as she thought about Heidi. I can't walk away now. After some negotiation and promises to check in regularly, Jennifer convinced the paper to let her continue. She retrieved her ID and other documents from the secure storage where she'd left them, but instead of heading home, she stuffed them back in her worn backpack. The next 48 hours became a blur of visiting shelters, soup kitchens, and known gathering spots for the homeless community. Every person she spoke to knew Heidi, the quiet woman who always shared her food, who helped others find safe places to sleep, who carried a mysterious photograph she never showed anyone. Jennifer's reporter's notebook, now filled with preliminary notes for her article, told a story far different from what she'd originally planned to write. Between the facts and figures about homelessness were stories of broken families, lost connections, and the desperate need for human dignity. While searching for Heidi, Jennifer discovered that Ravian continued her volunteer work at the community center, unaware that her mother had been displaced. The weight of this knowledge pressed heavily on Jennifer's conscience. She had to find Heidi before revealing anything to Ravian. Late one night, as Jennifer huddled in a doorway reviewing her notes, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her eyes widened as she read the message. Heidi had been spotted in the notorious Riverside District, an area known for its drug trade and danger. An anonymous message came through. Woman matching your friend's description seen near the old factory complex. Warning, dangerous area. Jennifer stared at the phone screen, her hands shaking. The Riverside District was the last place anyone would want to go, especially at night. Drug dealers controlled the territory, and the abandoned factories had become a maze of danger and despair. She pulled her worn jacket tighter and started walking. The streets became increasingly desolate as she approached the district, broken streetlights creating pools of darkness. A group of men huddled around a burning barrel eyed her suspiciously as she passed. Looking for someone? A raspy voice called out from the shadows. Jennifer turned to see an elderly man with weathered features, leaning against a graffiti covered wall. My friend Heidi, Jennifer said, pulling out the small photo she'd taken of them together. Have you seen her? The man studied the photo, then glanced nervously over his shoulder. Yeah, she's here. They've got her holed up in the blue factory. But listen, girl, you don't want to go there alone. Jennifer's chest tightened. They, local crew, they're using some of the homeless as lookouts, keeping them strung out so they can't leave. He shook his head. Your friend got caught up in it after the sweep. The information hit Jennifer like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on finding Heidi, she hadn't considered what desperate situations the cleanup operation might force people into. Using her reporter's instincts, Jennifer spent the next hour carefully gathering intel from others in the area. The Blue Factory was a 3-story building at the edge of the complex, its windows boarded up except for strategic lookout points. She needed help. Using her phone one last time, she contacted Mark at the paper. I found her, she whispered into the phone. But I need backup. Can you get word to Detective Rivera, the one who helped with the corruption story last year? Jenny, this is insane. You need to get out of there. Just make the call, Mark. Please. While waiting, Jennifer documented everything she saw, her journalist training taking over. The comings and goings from the factory, the patterns of the lookouts, the signs of human trafficking mixed with the drug operation. This wasn't just a story about homelessness anymore. It was about how society's most vulnerable were exploited when they had nowhere else to go. In her pocket, the phone vibrated with one short pulse. Help was coming, but as Jennifer watched another group of dealers enter the building, she wondered if it would arrive in time. Jennifer pulled her threadbare jacket tighter around her shoulders as she ventured into the notorious Red District. The streetlights cast eerie shadows on the crumbling walls, and suspicious eyes followed her every move from darkened doorways. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but the thought of Heidi kept her moving forward. A group of men lounged against a graffiti-covered wall, their faces hard and unwelcoming. Jennifer approached them, fighting to keep her voice steady. I'm looking for someone, a woman named Heidi. The tallest man stepped forward, towering over her. Information ain't free around here, lady. Jennifer reached into her pocket, pulling out the last $20 she had. The man snatched it, examined it under the dim light, and jerked his head toward a narrow alley. Building with the broken windows. 3rd floor. But watch yourself. Ain't exactly the Hilton up there. The stairwell reeked of urine and rotting garbage. Jennifer climbed carefully, testing each step before putting her full weight on it. On the 3rd floor, she found Heidi huddled in a corner of an abandoned apartment, shivering despite the mild temperature. Heidi! Jennifer's voice cracked with emotion. Heidi looked up, her eyes glazed and unfocused. Jennifer? How? Why are you here? Jennifer knelt beside her friend, noting the fresh bruises on her arms and the hollow look in her eyes. I've been searching everywhere for you. We need to get you out of here. Why do you care so much? Heidi's voice was barely a whisper. Taking a deep breath, Jennifer knew it was time. Because I'm not who you think I am. I'm a journalist. I've been working on a story about homelessness, but it became so much more than that. The silence that followed was deafening. Heidi's face transformed from confusion to betrayal to rage. She scrambled to her feet, backing away from Jennifer. You've been lying to me? Using me for some damn story? No. Well, yes, at first, but please let me explain. Jennifer reached into her recovered backpack and pulled out a folder. While investigating, I found something about Ravian. Heidi froze at her daughter's name. Jennifer continued, spreading out documents on the dirty floor. She's alive, Heidi. She's well, and she's closer than you think. I found her. Tears streamed down Heidi's face as she stared at the papers, her hands trembling as she touched a recent photograph of a young woman with her eyes. her daughter's eyes. She works at a community center, helping people like us. Like you, Jennifer explained softly. She's beautiful, kind, and she's made something wonderful of her life. Heidi slid down the wall, clutching the photo to her chest. All this time, you were investigating me? I started investigating the system that failed you. But then I found Ravian, and I couldn't just write a story anymore. I had to help reconnect you. Hours passed as Jennifer explained everything. Her initial assignment, losing her documents, the growing investigation, and finally finding Ravian. Gradually, Heidi's anger melted into understanding, then hope. Can I really see her? Heidi asked, vulnerability replacing the hardness in her voice. She wants to meet you. I've arranged everything. Jennifer helped Heidi to her feet. But first, let's get you somewhere safe, get you cleaned up. As they left the building, Jennifer supporting Heidi's unsteady steps, the older woman squeezed her hand. Thank you for not giving up on me, for finding her. 3 days later, after proper rest meals and clean clothes, Heidi stood before the community center where Ravian worked. Her hands trembled as she stared at the building's entrance. Heidi hesitated at the entrance, her freshly washed hair and borrowed clothes making her look almost like her old self. What if she hates me? She whispered. She won't, Jennifer assured her, though her own heart was racing. She's been waiting for this too. They entered the building together, the air conditioning a stark contrast to the summer heat outside. A young woman sat behind the reception desk, sorting through papers. When she looked up, Jennifer heard Heidi's sharp intake of breath. The same eyes, the same gentle curve of the mouth. The resemblance was undeniable. Ravian stood slowly, her professional demeanor cracking as she took in the sight of her mother. I've seen you, she said softly, her voice trembling. So many times on Porter Street. You used to sit near the bakery. Heidi's legs gave out, and Jennifer quickly guided her to a nearby chair. You knew, Heidi managed to say. You saw me every Tuesday and Thursday when I'd go to the outreach program. Ravian moved from behind the desk, approaching cautiously. I recognized you from the photo I kept, the only photo I had. I wanted to speak to you so many times, but I was scared. I didn't know if you want to see me. Jennifer stepped back, giving them space as years of separation began to melt away. Mother and daughter sat together, their hands almost touching but not quite, as if both feared the other might disappear. I thought about you every day, Heidi confessed. I thought I was doing the right thing, giving you a chance at a better life. You did, Ravian said, finally reaching out to touch her mother's hand. That's why I'm here now, doing this work. Because of you. Because I want to help others like us. They talked for hours in the small conference room, sharing pieces of their lives, building bridges across the years that had separated them. Jennifer documented everything discreetly, knowing this was more than just a story now. It was the beginning of something bigger. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the windows, Ravian explained her work with homeless families, her voice growing stronger with each word. Heidi listened, pride and regret mingling in her tears. Jennifer's phone buzzed in her pocket. The editor-in-chief's name flashed on the screen. Jennifer watched as Heidi stood frozen before the community center's entrance, her worn hands fidgeting with the frayed edges of her jacket. Through the glass doors, they could see Ravian organizing supplies at the front desk, unaware of their presence. I can't do this, Heidi whispered, taking a step backward. Jennifer gently placed her hand on Heidi's shoulder. She's been waiting for this too, Heidi. More than you know. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss. Ravian looked up, her practiced welcome smile freezing as recognition dawned in her eyes. The clipboard she was holding clattered to the desk. For a long moment, no one moved. The bustling sounds of the community center faded into the background as mother and daughter stared at each other across the lobby. Ravian's hand trembled as she raised it to her mouth. I knew it was you, Ravian finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've seen you so many times. Heidi's legs seemed to give way, and Jennifer quickly guided her to a nearby chair. Ravian rushed forward, kneeling before her mother. Every Tuesday and Thursday, when you'd sleep in the park across from St. Michael's, and sometimes behind the grocery store on Oak Street, Ravian's words tumbled out in a rush. I've been watching you for months, trying to find the courage. You knew. Heidi's voice cracked. All this time, Ravian nodded, tears streaming down her face. I volunteer here specifically because I knew it was an area where you sometimes stayed. I'd bring extra supplies to the outreach programs, hoping. Jennifer quietly stepped back, giving them space while discreetly taking mental notes for her article. The story had taken an unexpected turn that she never could have anticipated. Why didn't you come to me? Heidi asked, her hand hovering uncertainly near her daughter's face. I was scared, Ravian admitted. I didn't know if you want to see me, if you'd be angry that I had a good life while you. She trailed off, looking down at her hands. Angry? Heidi shook her head vigorously. That's all I ever wanted for you, to have a chance at a good life. Ravian took her mother's weathered hands in her own. I have so much to tell you about my family, my work here. She glanced at Jennifer. And I want to hear everything. Everything that happened after. They moved to a private consultation room, where Raven explained how she discovered her mother's identity through old adoption records. She described watching from afar, gathering courage, coordinating with other volunteers to ensure her mother always had access to services in the area. I've been working here for 3 years, Raven explained, helping others while trying to find a way to help you. We've helped reconnect other families, but I could never. It's okay, Heidi said softly, reaching out to touch her daughter's face at last. We're here now, Jennifer observed as they began sharing stories. Ravian's childhood, Heidi's struggles, their separate but somehow parallel journeys toward this moment. The pain of their separation transformed into something new as they discovered shared mannerisms, similar laughs, common interests that had somehow survived their years apart. As the afternoon progressed, they began tentatively making plans. Ravian spoke of her work with homeless outreach programs, while Heidi shared her experiences on the streets. Together, they started brainstorming ways to help other families in similar situations. Maybe, Ravian suggested, we could develop a special program here at the center, something specifically for helping families reconnect. Jennifer's phone buzzed in her pocket. The editor-in-chief's name flashed on the screen. It could be more than just shelter, Heidi added, her eyes lighting up for the first time in years. A place where people can safely look for their loved ones, get help with paperwork. Jennifer excused herself quietly, stepping into the hallway as mother and daughter continued their planning. The phone kept buzzing insistently in her hand. We could use my experience, Ravian was saying through the door, combined with your understanding of what people really need when they're on the streets. Heidi's voice cracked with emotion. All those years, I thought I'd lost everything, but you were right here, helping others, becoming exactly the kind of person I hoped you'd be. And you never gave up, Ravian replied, wiping tears from her eyes. Even at your lowest, you kept that photo, kept hoping. Jennifer watched through the window as they embraced again, years of separation dissolving in shared tears and tentative smiles. The story had evolved far beyond her original concept of an undercover investigation. It had become something more profound, a testament to resilience, hope, and the enduring bonds of family. As the afternoon light began to fade, Ravian showed them around the center, pointing out various services they offered and introducing them to other staff members. She explained how they could expand their current programs to include family reunification services. We already have the basic infrastructure, Ravian explained, gesturing to the computer labs and consultation rooms. We just need to redirect some resources, maybe apply for additional funding. And people who understand both sides, Heidi added, looking meaningfully at her daughter. People who know what it's like to be lost and what it's like to be searching. Jennifer's phone buzzed again, more urgently this time. She glanced at the screen to see multiple missed calls and messages from her editor-in-chief. Whatever he needed to discuss, it seemed increasingly important. The hardest part, Ravian said, pulling Jennifer's attention back to the conversation, is going to be building trust. So many people on the streets have been hurt by the system, abandoned by their families. That's where I can help, Heidi said firmly. I know what it's like. I can talk to them, help them believe that sometimes happy endings are possible. The three women stood together in the gathering dusk, looking out over the city through the center's windows. Somewhere out there, other families were separated, lost, hoping for their own reconnection. Jennifer's phone buzzed one final time in her pocket. Jennifer sat in the conference room, her hands clasped tightly on her lap as she faced the editorial board. The white walls and fluorescent lights felt alien after weeks on the streets. Editor-in-chief Marcus Davidson leaned forward, his expression stern. "This isn't the story we assigned, Jennifer," he said, tapping her draft on the table. "No, it's better," she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "What I discovered goes beyond social inequality. It's about broken families, systemic failures, and most importantly, hope." She pulled out her laptop and began presenting her vision for a family reconnection project. As she spoke, her passion became evident, drawing in even the most skeptical board members. She described how Heidi and Ravian's story could be the catalyst for something larger. "We have an opportunity here," Jennifer continued, "not just a report on homelessness, but to actively make a difference." The room fell silent. Then Sarah, the features editor, spoke up. "This could be a series. Document the project as it develops. Follow multiple families." Other journalists began joining the conversation, offering contacts and resources. Jennifer felt the momentum building as her colleagues caught her vision. She pulled out her phone, showing them messages from other homeless individuals seeking to reconnect with their families. Later that day, Heidi and Ravian joined her at a local coffee shop to discuss their roles in the project. Heidi's eyes sparkled with purpose for the first time since Jennifer had met her. "I could help others understand," Heidi said. "Show them they're not alone." Ravian nodded, already making notes about expanding her volunteer network. "The community center can be our base of operations. We already have the infrastructure." Jennifer spent the next few days building partnerships. She met with social workers, local shelters, and legal aid organizations. Each conversation added another piece to the puzzle. The project was taking shape, becoming more than just an idea. The first success story came unexpectedly. A young man named Marcus recognized his mother in one of Jennifer's preliminary articles. Within days, they were reunited after 6 years apart. Their tearful reunion was captured in Jennifer's follow-up piece, generating significant public interest. Heidi proved to be a natural at connecting with other homeless individuals. Her experience lent her authenticity that no amount of training could provide. She worked tirelessly, walking the street she once called home, now with a different purpose. "Sometimes," she told Jennifer, "all people need is someone who understands to reach out a hand." The bureaucratic challenges were daunting. Jennifer spent countless hours navigating red tape, filing paperwork, and arguing with officials. But each small victory made it worthwhile. When they secured their first grant, the celebration in their makeshift office felt like winning a Pulitzer. Public interest grew steadily. Local news stations picked up the story, and donations began flowing in. Jennifer's original article series evolved into a documentary project, capturing the raw emotions of families finding each other again. One evening, as Jennifer watched Heidi and Ravian working together at the community center, she reflected on her own transformation. The journalist who had trembled through her first night on the streets now saw the world through different eyes. "We're making history," Ravian said, joining her by the window. "Every family we bring together changes the narrative about homelessness." Jennifer nodded, thinking about all the stories yet to be told. Her phone buzzed with a message from the editor-in-chief. But before she could read it, a commotion near the entrance caught her attention. A newly reunited family through the project brings a surprising revelation. The family at the entrance was the Hendersons, a mother and daughter who had been separated for nearly a decade. But it was what Mrs. Henderson said that made Jennifer's heart skip a beat. "My sister," she said, clutching her daughter's hand. "She's out there too. We lost touch when I ended up on the streets, but if you found my Sarah, maybe." Jennifer exchanged glances with Heidi. This was exactly why they had started the project. One connection leading to another, rebuilding the torn fabric of families piece by piece. More revelations followed as other families came forward. Each story seemed to connect to another, creating an intricate web of relationships that had been severed by poverty, addiction, and circumstance. The project was uncovering a hidden network of separated families that stretched across the city. Back at her desk, Jennifer finally read the editor's message. The paper wanted to expand the project into a permanent section dedicated to family reconnection stories and resources. They were offering her full editorial control. "It's not just about finding people anymore," Jennifer explained to her team during their evening meeting. "It's about preventing these separations in the first place." Heidi stood up, her confidence growing with each passing day. "We need to address the root causes," she said. "Housing instability, mental health support, addiction services." Ravian was already expanding their database, creating categories for different types of separation cases. Her experience at the community center proved invaluable in understanding the patterns that led to family breakdown. The project's success began attracting attention from social service agencies in other cities. Requests for consultation and partnership proposals filled Jennifer's inbox. What had started as a simple investigative assignment was becoming a model for social change. As the sun set over the city, Jennifer watched another family leave the center, their tears of joy still fresh. The article she had originally planned seemed insignificant now, compared to the movement she had helped create. Heidi approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Remember that first night, when you were pretending to be homeless?" she asked with a gentle smile. "Look at us now." Jennifer nodded, her throat tight with emotion. They had all been transformed, reporter, subject, and story becoming something greater than themselves. The phone in her pocket buzzed again, but this time, she knew whatever news it brought would only add to their growing mission. A newly reunited family, through the project, brings a surprising revelation. Jennifer stood in front of the renovated building, its fresh paint and new sign reading Family Reconnection Center gleaming in the morning sun. The transformation from her first night on the streets to this moment felt surreal. Inside, volunteers were preparing for the official opening ceremony, and she could see Heidi through the window, adjusting her collar nervously in front of a mirror. The crowd gathering outside included city officials, social workers, and several families who had already benefited from their pilot program. Jennifer's editor sat in the front row, beaming with pride at how her investigative piece had evolved into something far greater than anyone had anticipated. Heidi stepped onto the small podium, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the microphone. The woman speaking now bore little resemblance to the distrustful stranger Jennifer had met under that bridge months ago. Her voice, though shaky at first, grew stronger as she shared her story. "I never thought I'd be standing here today," Heidi began. "A year ago, I was invisible. People walked past me on the streets, avoiding eye contact. Today, I'm not just visible. I'm helping others become visible too." She paused, looking at Ravian, who stood at the back of the room with tears in her eyes. Jennifer watched as several journalists scribbled notes. Her series of articles about homelessness and family separation had garnered national attention, earning her a prestigious award. But sitting there, watching Heidi speak, she knew the real achievement wasn't the recognition. It was the lives they were changing. After the ceremony, the three women retreated to the small office they now shared. Ravian had expanded her volunteer program to include training for other centers across the city. Maps covered the walls, marking locations where similar programs were being implemented. Can you believe it's only been 6 months? Ravian asked, placing a fresh cup of coffee on Jennifer's desk. The young woman had inherited her mother's deep eyes and determination, but there was a gentleness to her that reminded Jennifer of how healing could transform pain into purpose. Heidi, now living in a small apartment near Ravian's place, had become the center's most effective advocate. Her firsthand experience and natural empathy made her invaluable in approaching people still living on the streets. She knew their fears, their shame, their hesitation to hope. The center's success had caught the attention of city officials. New policies were being drafted, inspired by their work. Jennifer's latest series of articles focused on systematic changes needed to prevent family separation in the first place. Her desk was covered with testimonials from families reunited through their program. "We need more space," Heidi declared, reviewing their growing waiting list. "And more volunteers." She looked at the wall of photos, faces of people still searching for their loved ones. Each picture represented a story waiting to be completed. Jennifer watched as mother and daughter worked together, their movements synchronized after months of rebuilding their relationship. Heidi had moved into an apartment just 3 blocks from Ravian's place, and they had dinner together twice a week, making up for lost time while planning the center's future. Late that evening, as the center quieted down, Jennifer sat at her desk, looking through photographs from the opening ceremony. Her phone buzzed with messages from other journalists interested in covering their work. The project had sparked similar initiatives in neighboring cities. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. A family stood there, a mother and teenage son, recently reunited through their program. The woman held out an old photograph. "We found her," she said, her voice breaking. "My daughter. Your center helped us locate her. She's been living just 20 miles away all this time." Jennifer watched as Heidi and Ravian embraced the family, their own story reflecting in this new chance at reunion. Through the window, she could see the city lights flickering, knowing that somewhere out there, more families were waiting to find their way back to each other. Looking at Heidi and Ravian working side by side, Jennifer smiled. Their story had become more than just an article or a project. It had become a beacon of hope for countless others. They had created something that would continue long after the initial headlines faded. Some stories have no ending, Jennifer thought, watching mother and daughter working together in the project that had changed their lives and continues to change so many others. The new family's revelation had brought fresh energy to the center. As Jennifer helped them fill out the necessary paperwork, she noticed how Heidi subtly wiped tears from her eyes. Every reunion affected her deeply, as if she was reliving her own miracle through each family's story. Their database had grown exponentially. What started as a simple spreadsheet now included sophisticated matching algorithms, cross-referencing public records with personal accounts. Local tech companies had volunteered their expertise, creating a user-friendly platform that connected similar centers across the state. "We've got another lead in Sacramento," Ravian announced, scrolling through her tablet. Her volunteer network had expanded beyond city limits, creating a web of support that caught stories that might otherwise have slipped through the cracks. She had inherited her mother's tenacity, but tempered it with professional expertise that made their operation more efficient each day. The wall behind Jennifer's desk displayed framed copies of her articles, but more prominently, it showcased letters from reunited families. Their words of gratitude served as daily reminders of why they pushed through the challenging days, the bureaucratic roadblocks, the emotional setbacks, the cases that seemed impossible until they weren't. Heidi had become particularly skilled at handling the most difficult cases. Her experience on the streets gave her insights that no amount of professional training could replicate. She knew exactly when to push and when to step back, how to earn trust from people who had learned the hard way not to trust anyone. As the evening wound down, Jennifer watched Heidi and Ravian gathering their things, planning their weekly dinner together. Their relationship had blossomed beyond mere reconciliation into a deep partnership. They complemented each other's strengths, and their shared purpose had healed wounds that once seemed permanent. The center hummed with possibility. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, new opportunities to bridge gaps that had seemed unbridgeable. Jennifer's notebook was filled with stories waiting to be told, each one a testament to the power of persistence and hope. Outside, the city was settling into night, but inside the Family Reconnection Center, the light stayed on, a beacon for those still searching for their way home. Jennifer knew that somewhere out there, another family was gathering courage to take the first step toward reunion. Another story was waiting to begin,